Hello and welcome to Friday afternoon here at Go Narrative. Super excited to have you here today. My name is Matthew. I am your host for our little interaction today. Thank you so much for the folks who attended last week and the questions that we got. And we are going to keep on chugging this week. That's right. We love helping. I personally love guiding founders, especially technical founders, through that challenge that you experience after Series A as you're heading towards Series B. Don't get too hung up in the alphabet soup. Obviously, when it comes to Series B, we are talking about funding. But you could be getting funding from other sources as well. It doesn't have to be Series B, but that Series A kind of space, especially when your team is maybe pushing 50, 70 people, your revenue is, your targets are now starting to look more like 5 million, 10 million, right? That is a very important moment for any business. And the moment is the fact that the story that you are telling to get to that next milestone isn't the story that got you to where you are today. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not stuff that's left from the old days, so to say, but that narrative is shifting, the way that you talk about the company, the ability for you as a founder to be confident that your team is able to step up and represent for you what you want the story to be, what you want the strategy to be. I love how Ben Horowitz says, in great companies, the story and the strategy are the same thing. And that is what we love doing in these Friday afternoon teardowns. And we do have a teardown today. So before Series B is what we love to call this. That before Series B moment, as we've mentioned, it's really about that. We are now taking that next big step. Now, if you are in Series A, if you've achieved Series A and you're going for Series B, then yes, absolutely, you are going to need to get that next round of funding, right? That's very much one of your objectives. And in going for that funding, that is that big moment that we're talking about. How do you articulate? How do you make sure that your whole team articulates that? And if deals only close when you're on the call, you know that's a problem, right? If deals only close when you're on the call, or have you been, as a ride-along, maybe called in by the sales team to help out on a particular opportunity? We've all seen that happen, right? And you're sitting there in the room and what your sales team is saying is different to what you want them to be saying. That is a challenge. And that is a challenge because you're sitting there right there in that moment. You're thinking, oh my gosh, like, no, this isn't what we should be saying. And sometimes you might interject, you might dive in, you might course correct. And you want to look good though. You want your company to look good. So that's going to be extra effort for you. Whether you do that, whether you kind of bite your tongue and have a conversation after the meeting, none of these are ideal situations, right? We want to be confident in these engagements, in these meetings, and that when we're not in the room, that isn't going to be a roadblock, that deal is going to keep marching forward. And You've probably told yourself in these situations, you know what? We've got a complicated product, right? It's not that. It really isn't. I mean, everything is actually really quite complicated, right? If you start scratching below the surface, but what you do for people, that is where the magic's happening, right? It's not because the product is complex. It's because that story requires you to decode it, right? And when you're smaller, when you were like 10, 15 people, 20 people, it wasn't so much of a challenge, right? You were either in the room or you had just been in the room with the person who was going to be in the room where the magic was going to be happening. You had your arms around it. Your fingerprints were all over it. And you got into whatever it is that you're doing today because you were driven. You have a passion for what you are delivering. And that simply doesn't scale, right? And if it requires you in the room to decode it, and if only you can decode it, you can see where this starts to become more and more of a problem, right? You don't have a sales process at that point. You have a hostage situation, and it might be you holding your salesperson hostage. Today, I am looking for one thing. When we look at the homepage, I want you to be looking for the thing that you think can't travel without the founder. Now, don't panic. I'll be with you on this journey and we'll be talking about it. But I do want you to keep that in mind as you look at the homepage that we'll look at in a minute. What are you seeing that you think wouldn't be able to travel without the founder? Remember, the website, the founder can have their fingerprints all over that, get that published, and it can be set in stone for at least a little while. But in the heat of the sales call, do we think what we're seeing on the website is going to translate? In the heat of the sales call, when brass tacks are on the table and we're talking about the things that our buyer really needs, their priorities are around, or the users working with that buyer, maybe they're in the room as well. Those brass tacks, like, is what we're seeing on the website going to connect to that, right? So keep that in mind. What can't travel without the founder? And that isn't just about confusion, right? That's definitely a part of the puzzle, right? And in some cases, we look at websites and they actually need explaining, right? The one we look at today, I'm actually pleased to let you know in advance that it's a pretty simple, clear, above the fold message, okay? So some websites, that's not the case, and they do need that meeting to explain. But even if you've got a clear message on the website, you can still have this challenge that we've been talking about. And one way to talk about it or to think about it is called delegation failure, right? And if you have to be in the room, that means the delegation has failed to happen, right? So don't worry too much about this idea of delegation failure. It's really about this ability for this message to travel without you in the room, right? Where does the story live, right? Is it still locked up here? And last week when we talked about that rewriting, right, that was very much about, I've got this idea up here and I'm trying to get it out and it's not quite coming out in the right way. So you can see how these things are all related, okay? If the idea you have up here as a founder isn't coming out the way you want, isn't landing the way you want, isn't being perceived the way you want, that's a challenge. And each one of those steps, from what you're projecting to what's the sounds that are going into your team's ears, to how they're processing it in their brain, to how they're then doing that process in a sales meeting, there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. And when we have inconsistencies, when there's a lack of clarity, when there isn't a clear red thread, all of those sorts of things work against us. And if that's happening, then it's all going to have to run through you as a founder. And that's going to be a roadblock. That's going to be that roadblock when you're sitting in those investor meetings pitching for Series B and you're seeking to articulate why your company, and why they should believe you and these markets that you're talking about being able to penetrate. And the real numbers aren't trending upwards at the same rate because you have to be in the room every time. You can see how this becomes a very practical problem as a founder, right? This is something that you absolutely need to solve. And if you're that load-bearing wall, we know what happens when we remove the load-bearing wall, right? It's not pretty. So we want it to be pretty. We want it to be beautiful. Pull you out, the story collapses. We don't want that. That is not pretty. That is not beautiful. We don't want to be in that situation. What can't travel without you? Okay? Right. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Here we go. Robust.ai. We make robots work for people. Remember what I asked you to be looking for, listening for, right? What do we think can't travel without the founder in the room? We're assuming that the founder has their fingerprints on the website, final approval, okay? We make robots work for people. Seems pretty simple and straightforward and clear, doesn't it? You can imagine that there could be you can imagine the backroom conversation where maybe that came about. The problem is, it's a value statement. It's true. People want it. Nobody disagrees with it, but a warehouse ops manager, whether they're the buyer or they're the user who's sitting around that table in that sales conversation, they can't hear "we make robots work for people" and say, "That's my problem," right? Doesn't mean that it's not true. Doesn't mean that implementations of robots have failed to work well for people. It doesn't mean that that's not a problem. But that ops manager, what is their truth, right? That person who's literally in the warehouse that we're seeing on the website here, what is the problem that's stuck in their head, right? So when your rep says this to that buyer, what happens, right? Now, even if you as a founder had your fingerprints all over the website, if you're not in that room, and the reaction when the sales rep starts talking about making robots work for people is one that maybe involves crossed arms and a furrowed brow, or some form of pushback from the potential prospect. If you're not there to step in and save the day, what's your sales rep going to do? They're going to fall back on old information, maybe. They're going to fall back on their creativity, maybe. They are going to detect the challenge and try and adapt to it, right? So they're picking up on this. It's not my problem, right? I've said this. What I thought was this great pitch. It included we make robots work for people, which means that they have to adapt in the moment and they're going to have to try and come up with something, right? And like I said, that could be old information. It could be their creativity, but it's not what you want them to be saying, whatever that happens to be, right? And we're not here to like rewrite the website or rewrite the pitch here. I'm using this as an example, okay? I can't help but think about that load-bearing wall again, right? It's this is a load-bearing wall homepage. You pull the CEO out of the pitch meeting, and I'm not sure this page can carry the conversation without him either. I mean, there's nothing about who's the target or the specific pains, right? The fix here is not better copy. It's answering one question that the page, that the rep, that in person has to be able to answer. And that is, what changes in this operator's day when this is deployed? Autonomy, collaboration are the mechanism. The operator's shift is the outcome, right? And if it's big enough, it could be more than just their workday that benefits from this. Having worked in ERP, I'm thinking of this wonderful book called The Goal, about a literal novel that explains ERP. And the impact that success when this operator is effectively running their warehouse or a factory or whatever it happens to be, that shift, lead with that shift, what those outcomes can be, right? And if that answer was to live here, then your rep doesn't need to be you, because that message, that story, that deal can start to travel without you in the room. And what we find, I see it time and time again, is if it's made it onto the web page, it's probably what the company line is, right? Toe this line. This is what it is. We've got to talk about this. And this is really important. This is our focus. Right. But we're not here to rewrite that. But I do have a couple of questions. If Robust AI were in the room, I'd ask him the question. But I'll ask it for you, and you can ask these questions. You'll change a few of the details, right? So question one in this case is, if your best customer's ops manager landed on the homepage right now, pardon me, what exact moment in their shift would make them say, that's it, that's me? That's me. I feel that's boom. And is that moment front and center? Is it above the fold, as we see on the website? Okay, so that'd be question number one. Best customer shift they need. Feel that's me. Okay, that's question one. Question number two. When a non-founder rep, when your best salesperson, when Robust's best salesperson in this case, explains this company, explains the company, right, in 10 seconds, do they lead with autonomous and collaborative? Do they lead with that? Or can they name the operational difficulty and the measurable change that happens and that is needed, that is created, without drifting into buzzwords? And buzzwords are a problem because they're a crutch, right? We all spend so much time in our own areas of expertise, communicating with other people in our own areas of expertise. We develop these shortcuts, right? It's those shortcuts, it's those crutches that become these buzzwords. So words like autonomous and collaborative are great shortcuts inside a company, because you don't want to have to go into the details of what collaborative means every time when it relates to these robots, right? Problem is what gets said inside a company gets said outside of the company. And what you want as a founder is you want what you're saying inside the company to get outside the company, right? And you don't want that to be buzzwords, crutch words, proxy words. You want it to be words that are meaningful to the people that you're seeking to change their jobs and their lives. Okay. Can your rep and does your website name the operational difficulty? Okay, with no buzzwords. So that's the second question. If you can't answer both of those quickly, that is your delegation problem, and that is what we're talking about today. And again, delegation, that's a nice big fancy word, right? Crack out the dictionary and have a look at the definition. But what do we mean by delegation? It means, does your story travel without you in the room? Okay. Delegation. Does your story travel without you in the room? Does the message you want to spread as a founder spread? Is that what is spreading? Is everybody on the team able to do that? Beautiful place to be, right? So we opened with this idea of deals only closing when you're on the call, right? And that leads us to this concept that we generally all understand of delegation, but this concept of the story delegating, right? The bigger story that we're trying to tell about the business and our impact on your lives as a customer, because that's why you want to buy from us, is that traveling without you in the room as a founder, because that is a vital roadblock that you need to move out of the way if you are going to tilt that growth trajectory up, whether you're going for Series B or not. If you're going for Series B, specifically after on the alphabet suit round, and going for that because it makes perfect sense for how you plan the business. I'm not knocking it. That uptick, that proof, that trajectory is going to be vital there. And even if you're not going for any investment, that value in the business that you're building is represented in that uptick, right? And hey, you came up with this idea for the business as a founder. You probably have other ideas, right? I mean, do you want to be doing this business forever? Do you want to sell the company and become an employee of this company? Probably not. I mean, I'm not knocking it. Some people might want to do that. Whilst you're trapped in the lower growth, whilst you're trapped in not getting the investment that you want, whilst you're trapped in being the load-bearing wall for all the conversations, all the sales engagements, and the Marcom conversations that result in the copy for the website that you then have to approve alongside all the other things that you're trying to do, that is all going to take your time and take your energy, and it's going to stand in the way of you being able to do these other things. Growing the business, adding new products, innovating, or eventually selling the business and moving on to the next business. And that is why you want to make sure that that story can travel without you in the room. And I would challenge you to have a bit of fun on this. Okay, so we've talked about all the serious stuff, right? We've talked about the challenges of buzzwords. We've talked about delegation. We've talked about websites and sales meetings. How can you go and start to really make this real? What is the thing you can do next to practice this and to build this? Well, go tell the story that you want your reps to be telling. In fact, we can remove the business side of it completely and just have total fun with this. You can pick something that's happened to you today, yesterday, this week, the most interesting thing that's happened. It could be good or it could be bad, just something interesting that's happened to you. And if you want to use a work thing, business thing, that's totally fine. I'm giving you permission not to. And I want you to go and tell that story. I want you to think about, what did you want? Okay, what desire did you have? What stood in your way? What difficulty was there? And what was the direction that you took to cut through the difficulty and to get to what you desired? Now, that practice is going to help you and is going to serve you well when it comes to developing that story that will travel so that you can shift away from being that load-bearing wall. And if you go and do that, think about that. I call it the power of 3D storytelling. Okay, it's desire, difficulty, and direction. There's a whole story behind the third D. It used to be a different word, but now we've simplified it. And in fact, we did a LinkedIn carousel this past week on this as well. What is wanted, what stands in the way, and what's the direction through it? We saw it today. What do you want on the website? What's standing in the way? And how do you cut to the next step? We saw it in the ideas of the conversations with sales reps and customers. We saw it in the idea of the operators themselves. What do they want? What's the shift in their day? What stands in the way? And how do you help provide that direction, or how does robust AI in this case provide the direction to cut through that? So you can see how this pattern is everywhere. And it's very much at the heart of everything that I do and the passion that I have about making sense of what you do so that you can make that make sense to everybody else. And it all starts with thinking in that form. Very nice and very simple way you can do that. So a bit of fun. Of course, everything else you can take, and you can hopefully took copious notes, go back, watch the replay, and do the serious stuff when it comes to the website and when it comes to the sales meetings and making sure that story is traveling without you. You can do the fun stuff as well. So thank you so much. And check out the website. We've got resources up there to help you. You can discover your story type, and that can help you as well when it comes to coming up with that story that's going to travel without you in the room. And LinkedIn, comment on the video below. What's the one big challenge you have when it comes to getting your team to take that story, or maybe one that you had in the past that you solved? That can also be a nice safe place for us all to go, one that we overcame. And LinkedIn, send an invite, DM, comment on the content, and any of those, love to see the comments, respond to all of them personally myself, and I'm excited to hear about the challenges you have getting that story to travel without you in the room. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll be back next week with another teardown where we will have a look at yet another perspective, slightly different, on how we can create these compelling approaches to how we communicate using the power of story, really of narrative, and making sense of your business so that everybody else can make sense of it too. And you can crank up beyond Series A, hit Series B, and take it from there. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.